So we're going to be we're going to be going in album order and talking to first to Doug. His piece from Lidless Eyes, Time Knows No Bounds, is the first piece on our album. And yeah, Doug, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Cool. Thank you, Sagar, and thank you to the Vanguard Reed Quintet for having me. It's awesome to see you all. There are a few people on this call who I feel like I haven't seen in years. I also feel like I haven't seen other humans in a long time. Well, I've seen a lot of people on Zoom, but it's really good to see you all. And yeah, so my name is Doug Hertz. I'm the composer of the piece from Lidless Eyes, Time Knows No Bounds. I'm a composer and a percussionist and a producer. I am currently sheltering in place, if that's the terminology that we're still using, in the Hudson Valley in upstate New York. And yeah, maybe I'll just talk a bit about the piece that I wrote for Vanguard Reed Quintet. So this was the first piece that I wrote while I was getting my master's degree at Michigan. And I think I met Sean during orientation weekend, like the very first orientation weekend at Michigan. And I promised like maybe 50 pieces that weekend to different people because everyone's like, hey, like great to meet you. Let's all work together. But then my collaboration with Sean actually came to fruition. And I ended up writing this piece for the quintet. And it was such a sort of great way to warm up to the experience of working with instrumentalists at Michigan. I found the group to just be so warm and welcoming and open to new ideas and workshopping things. So it felt really great to work with them on the piece. The piece was inspired by a short story by an Argentinian author named Julio Cortázar. The short story is called Axolotl, which is the name of an amphibian. I don't know if it quite qualifies as a lizard, but in the story, Cortázar or some other first-person perspective narrator describes going to an aquarium in Paris and viewing these axolotls. Look them up, by the way; they're really amazing looking. Looking at them in an aquarium tank and kind of getting lost in the infinitude of time that these amphibians are probably experiencing, just like locked in a cage. Or in a aquarium, and at some point he becomes an axolotl, which is a really fascinating turn. But thinking about like just the infinitude of time, getting lost in that flow, reminded me somehow of the experience of riding a subway in New York City. And for those of us who have spent a lot of time on subways, maybe it's like a familiar sight of like people really just tuning each other out and getting lost in sort of this gray space of being in transit, of commuting. And then I leaped to the sort of visual imagery of lights streaming by outside of a subway window. And that image gave rise to this trill figure. So a trill is two notes alternating back and forth on a reed instrument or a woodwind instrument or any instrument. And that's sort of the gesture that birthed this piece, and from there it kind of wrote itself. There are other various references to the short story itself, but that's kind of where it began, and it was a process of workshopping it with the ensemble to get it to where it eventually was. Yeah, so that's maybe all I have to say about the piece for now.
Sure. Joe, why don't we talk a little bit about our history with this piece, because this one was one like this is the piece we've had for the longest time. Doug finished writing it in 2016, and we were working on it through that semester and then the following semester. So yeah, why don't we talk a little bit about the long history we have with this piece? It's been 3-4 years now.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely feel like this piece is very ingrained in the lore of the Vanguard Reed Quintet. Like when I think my first, I don't know if it was an audition or if I just kind of started playing with you guys, but my first time playing with everybody, this was one of the first pieces that I played. And every single time that I've played it since then, it feels like I discover something new about the piece or within the piece, some new impact. There's some rhythmic elision that I didn't notice before that just keeps like, you know, peeling back the layers of the onion. And I just find it so interesting that you can come back to a piece so many different times and find so many different things to latch onto, just within the music. And then I think I forget where we were, but we were playing a performance, and it must have been the CD launch party, uh, when we were at Carytown. I think I read the some of the poem that you referenced, Doug, and just prepping myself for that. I was like, man, there's even more to this. It's just it's very dense in the best way.
Yeah, and even just in terms of the history we have with this piece, like we premiered it. I think we actually premiered it at the 2017 Dale and Nancy Brings Chamber Music Competition, where we won the second place prize, which is an in-house chamber music competition that the University of Michigan hosts every year. And that's just like, that was, you know, our first big competition experience. You know, and then that kind of helped us get to the silver medal at Fishoff the next year. Um, and yeah, it's just this, like you said, Joe, this piece has been around for us as long as the group has, almost. And so and we continue to play it, and we continue to enjoy playing it, and sharing it with our audiences. And it's really such a treat. And we're so thankful to you, Doug, for writing this for us. So I think we're going to move over now to a quick clip from the piece. So this is from the middle of the piece, and it kind of exemplifies some of the what we like to think of, like the middle of the piece gets really percussive, and and Doug's going to talk about later, after we're done playing the clip, how his experience as a percussionist kind of informs his music, and specifically this piece as well. So here's a clip from Lidless Eyes, Time Knows No Bounds. Okay, so that was a brief clip from Lidless Eyes, Time Knows No Bounds. For the people who are just joining us, we are live talking about our debut album, Red Leaf Collection. This is the Vanguard Reed Quintet. And you can find this album right now. It's available to stream and download on services like Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, Amazon, and more. Okay, so Doug, why don't you tell us a little bit about how your experience as a percussionist informs your music, and also kind of informed this piece?
For sure. It's a really good question. The album sounds so good. Thank you so much to the Vanguard Reed Quintet for so many things. I don't know if I'll have like a graceful opportunity to express my gratitude, so I just want to pour all the gratitude now. You are all amazing. The album sounds so good. So the question. I would say that, well, something that I think is really interesting that I've been thinking about recently is comes from a thought experiment that I heard from the composer Annika Sokolovsky, who also went to Michigan. And I saw her give a talk, and she was encouraging composers to think about whether they're more attack-oriented or sustain-oriented. Or in other words, are they more interested in the onset of sounds and how subsequent onsets could create something called groove or rhythm, or more interested in like sustained sounds. And not to say that like a composer needs to fall into one camp or the other, but I kind of do fall into a camp. I'm very attack-oriented, and I think that comes from my experience with percussion, hitting things and a thing happens. So I would say that informs my voice a lot, and it's actually something I work. I try to compose in opposition to that tendency, and maybe that friction is something that is evident in parts of my music. But that's one thing that I think informs my compositional approach. I would also say that, especially in the excerpt that you just played, I have a tendency when I'm writing for ensembles to have different instruments playing a limited amount of notes. And in the interplay between those different cells of just a few notes, we get sort of like a composite image of something. And I think that relates to my playing of the drum set. I think I can say that. So if you're playing drum set, each of your limbs is usually responsible for just one voice, one instrument in the drum set, whether it's a cymbal or a snare drum or something like that. So I think with ensemble writing, I see a really cool opportunity to kind of engage the whole ensemble as one organism where everyone has a really specified role. And it's sort of in the interaction of those different roles, those different individual pitches as they are rhythmicized to create something that feels like a mega instrument. Yeah, that's what I'd say about that.
That's all. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Oh, thank you. I think one of my favorite parts about this piece is the breadth of colors that are on display, and which is one thing that I feel like the Reed Quintet is very, very strong in its compositional approach. Me being a bassoonist, the bassoon is a really wide timbral spectrum, and it's really, I feel like a lot of times it's music is written for it in a non-idiomatic way, but I feel like it just feels, so to say, I feel like I fight certain notes to play louder, softer, or into the color of the ensemble, but it just happens so naturally and organically. The softs are in a register or on specific pitches that just fit in, or it's a thinner part of the instrument that can fit into a softer sound that an oboe can make. And I was curious if that was something that you were conscious of in your writing, or if it was more of a happy accident.
May have been a happy accident. I listened to a ton of Reed Quintet repertoire before I wrote this piece. I listened a lot to the Acropolis Reed Quintet's album, their first album, and I think I had some of the sounds in mind that it seemed like Reed Quintets enjoyed playing, that they could really like dig into and sink their teeth into the various instruments. So it's like, I think it's part research and part happy accident, but thank you, Joe.
All right, I think we have to move on. So thank you so much, Doug. Thank you for joining us.